I wanted to do a video on corruption and trying to stay centered when it seems like you're surrounded by systems of corruption. So I've got a couple series out there in videos, and I'll get caught up on these, and a couple comments I really appreciate it, and I'll get caught up on these and respond to them very shortly now that the semester's over and grades are all in. But I thought I'd give a go at dealing with corruption. It's been something that's been kind of in the back of my mind for a while, and I'll show you how I integrate it into a real daily practice towards the end. So the first thing to keep in mind is that the idea of corruption, the notion of human beings being corrupt as a species, is a relatively new thing. I mean, we're very harmonious and part of nature. We've been around the planet for about 2.5 million years, and the thinking mind has only been around for maybe 40,000 or so years. And so the thinking mind is a relatively new thing. I mean, if you're thinking big scope in terms of years, and if you haven't checked out 2001: A Space Odyssey, I think it's a movie from the 80s. It has some really interesting psychology to it, and it speculates about the first human thought. And so we were very much a part of nature, and there was a fight for resources, and one of these ancestors lost this resource and then has the first thought. And the first thought was the idea that you could use a bone as a weapon and then get your resources back. And it's a very interesting moment in the movie because, of course, the ancestor has the bone in the right hand, which, of course, is controlled by the left brain. It's maybe why so many people across the planet are right-handed, because of the left brain's endless need for control, which all started at that same time. And, of course, that's exactly what the ancestor did. It went back and took control, got the resource back. But there's other stories. Of course, the Garden of Eden and Eve and being tempted by the fruit from the tree of knowledge. And you couldn't get much more obvious than saying, look, this is the tree of knowledge. This is the tree, this is the thinking mind. And to take a bite of that fruit is really symbolic, if in a really obvious way, of the birth of the thinking mind. And so, of course, all cultures have talked about this, the price we pay for the thinking mind, rather than just being expelled from Eden. Nowadays we'll talk about it as corruption. And so in Jewish tradition, it's the Yatzirah, this kind of nastiness that we carry around with us. In Christianity, it's sin. In Buddhism, it's stirring calm waters. And in even Freud and various psychological traditions, in Freud he called it the id. And when we take a look at the thinking mind, it's important to remember that, well, there's an old Zen story about a guy who gets bitten by a snake, and someone asks him if he's angry. And his response is, well, of course I'm not angry. It's in the snake's nature to bite. And in that same way, it's in the nature of the mind to be corrupt. And what I mean by corruption is to control the situation for the benefit of the self. And the idea of control and the self probably came online almost instantaneously. In fact, they may be very difficult to separate. And you can see this, we have expressions, get a hold of yourself. This idea that such a thing is absolutely even possible. And it's difficult because, the idea of control is just that. It's just an idea of control. And you see this in all forms of human interaction. We have things like government, and it's just another name for control. And human beings, well, I shouldn't say human beings, I should say human minds have been in the business of controlling other human minds for this last 40,000 years. I mean, the mind's mission, if you look around, this mission that comes out of the left brain has been to transform the world into a reflection of its own image of what it sees paradise to be. And of course, it's in some ways it can seem extremely unnatural and the source of our suffering, how we've transformed the world into something that just feels very alien to us. And so there's the human mind seems to be the source of corruption. Well, so what? What do we do with this? What's the practical side to this? Well, the practical side is to work this into our meditation. In other words, Well, the basic practice of meditation is the practice of letting go of this idea of control. And so you sit down, and I know myself, my biggest error in meditation for years was to believe that I could control the controller. I thought if I just meditated long enough, I'd be able to control the mind. And it just doesn't work like that. And so now, when I sit down and meditate, the idea is to step out of the way of the controlling mind, which is just another way of saying let the thought of control happen, but don't become attached to it. Don't energize it by identifying with it. So if you have thoughts of control, like some thought comes up or a feeling comes up and you want to alter its course, which of course that's what control is altering the course altering the direction of nature, let the thought happen. I mean, isn't that the point of stepping aside? It's just a thought. I mean, that's what control is. It's just another thought hiding in some group, as if it's some kind of greater mystery, but it really isn't. It's just another product of the thinking mind. And so you can make this as a practice, whether it's meditation, whether you do Tai Chi, or even play an instrument. And so if you play a musical instrument, what are you really doing when you're playing? Well, is it about control? Are you trying to be better? Are you trying to force it in some direction? Or are you letting the thinking mind kind of do its thing, but are you letting, and to be cliche, nature take its course? And that's what the psychologist Csikszentmihalyi, I mean, that's what he actually called it flow. And when he talked about the psychological state of flow, really what it was is the exact same state we get into when we're meditating the right way, which was to step aside, let things happen, let things go. And so one of the ways you can deal with corruption when you see it at every level of human interaction is to see it as an opportunity for another meditative practice. Here's another being who's got caught up into the notion of control, that such a thing is even possible. And that's it's the same thing. Anytime we see someone when they've been caught up in the mind and the thoughts and the self, it seems like it goes into a very strange direction. And so the best thing we can do from our end is to do the same thing in the outside world as we do in the inside world, is we let it go. Now, that doesn't mean that if you get overcharged, you just let it happen and you don't call and correct that bill. Sometimes people take this as some kind of plea of ultimate passivity, and it has nothing to do with that. It's all about an inner attitude and inner frequency of doing, but doing in a sense that isn't like, well, Alan Watts, he defined the ego once as a muscular tension centered around the ego. And that's so, whenever you feel the muscles tense up, that's that sense of control. Like, this must happen. This has to happen. And that's what we're talking about. That's the source of corruption. It's a bunch of minds tensing the muscles up, trying to get something done that they feel desperately is the right thing to do. And if human history teaches us one thing, it's that this thinking mind only thinks it knows the right way. And there's a greater source of intuition that is far more wise that we probably need to get in touch with, or step aside and let it do its thing, which it's been doing for a lot longer than the thinking mind has been around. And so this is a little bit longer video, but as always, drop me some comments, and I appreciate you checking this out.